Okay, and welcome to our next module. In this module, we'll be reviewing some of the major points regarding the U.S. Constitution. First of all, federalism, or an organizing government based on geographical division of power. Okay, a couple points about this. The national government has power over the entire territory, and the regional or state governments only have authority within their own borders. Now, let's just stop and pause for a second and talk through this. One of my snarky teenage daughters would probably say, "Duh, thank you, Captain Obvious." But we have to understand what's going on here. I always like to throw this out there to my students. Now, do you remember, if you've got kids of your own, do you remember, when you were in your parents' house and you said, "If I ever grow up and have kids, I'm never going to do this"? Well, you grow up and then you have words come out of your mouth, start thinking, "Oh my goodness, that's my father talking." However, there are some things that, yeah, you lived up to your promise, that you did some things differently. And so, remember in previous modules, we had talked about, how the colonial governments viewed their part of the pecking order inside the British government. They viewed Parliament as peer government, not superior. And so really what you're doing right here is trying to clean up some of the pecking order, right? It does make walking around sense, but I'll give you, for instance, as well, that modern day Vermont, there was a brief period of time that Massachusetts had authority over that territory outside of its borders. So this does seem like a very basic thing. It is, but they wanted to make sure that some of these things that they had seen before would not happen again. Separation of powers, organizing legislative, executive, and judicial functions of government characterized by the creation of independent institutions to perform those functions. Again, they're trying to clean some things up. This makes, again, walking around sense. Having one branch that does legislative functions, one that does executive, one that does judicial. But you have to remember, even in the British model, you have the executive embedded in the legislative function as well. So a lot of those lines are blurred. So what the framers wanted to do was have very clear lines of authority over who performed what functions. All right. Checks and balances. Now, we even before you walked into this class, you pretty much knew what checks and balances were, but this is a slightly different perspective on the same concept for you to consider. Here, concept where power of government, the three branches, is shared. Power of government is limited by creating interdependence, avoiding arbitrary action by any one branch. So yes, checks and balances does include, no, you can't do this, right? So a president can veto legislation from Congress. Congress can override a veto of the president, and so forth. But what we're really saying here too, flip side of the same coin, for a president to be able to do anything, it requires cooperation from Congress. For the Supreme Court to have its rulings adhered to, it has to be adhered to and executed by the other branches as well. So it does require a sharing of authority to some point to get anything done. One branch just can't by itself go off and do its own thing. Judicial review. Now you notice here I've got asterisks around this. Judicial review, power of the judiciary to declare acts of the executive or legislative branches as unconstitutional. Now, I've got this in this list as I've taught this over the years. I was a teaching assistant back in graduate school, and you have many different texts out there. When we talk about this concept, most authors and most instructors include this as a part of this general discussion. However, I would say judicial review, we'll talk about it later, the story of how the Supreme Court acquired judicial review as an authority, as a power. Judicial review, you don't find it anywhere in the Constitution, right? So when I do these classes, I try to be consistent with the textbooks, but also like to at least throw out there a little bit more information for you. I didn't write the textbook. If I did, I probably would leave this one out. But judicial review and the Supreme Court is in a position, again, we'll tell that story later, but the Supreme Court is in a position to declare acts of Congress or the executive as unconstitutional. Popular sovereignty. We keep coming back to this, but it's very important. It was very important for the framers' beliefs that the people are the ultimate source of all power. And even then, you can actually get bored one night, can't sleep. Even research some of the discussion in and around just the preamble of the Constitution. There was a lot of wordsmithing and angst, whatever you want to call it, just in how to word the preamble to recognize the whole concept of popular sovereignty. National supremacy. The Constitution and all national laws are supreme. Okay? Again, this does make sense. It's consistent with our view. One thing I do want to point out, we'll be talking about this in coming modules as well. Originally, there was a notion of dual sovereignty, right? That as the Constitution was ratified, some of the powers were taken away from the sovereign states and given to this new national government to help fix some of the ills of the articles. But at the time, the states were considered to have retained some items that this national government was deemed not to really need. All right, but in this case, national supremacy, Constitution, and all national laws are supreme. Bill of Rights. Now, I told you a minute ago I didn't write the textbook. Now, had I written it, I would have left judicial review off and I would have put Bill of Rights in. Most the times we discuss this, we don't mention the Bill of Rights inside this concept. But if you remember, we were talking about the Anti-Federalists in a previous module. That they were really lathered up that there was no Bill of Rights in the Constitution. That's what they were used to. That was part of the tradition. Well, the Constitution, in large part, was ratified based on the promise that a Bill of Rights would be drafted and incorporated as amendments into the Constitution. So with that, that's the end of this discussion, end of this module. As always, go back and review as needed. And with that, we will pick it up with the next module. Thank you.